Deep beneath 268 feet of Greenland ice, something was waiting, something that had been abandoned for 50 years, something that would shock the world when they finally found what was inside. In the early 1990s, a team of American explorers made a discovery that would rewrite aviation history. What they pulled from that frozen tomb wasn't just a plane, it was a perfect time capsule from World War II, preserved in ice like a fly in amber. It began with a jagged silhouette breaking the horizon, an iceberg larger and more angular than anything typically spotted in Greenland's frozen expanse. But this wasn't just ice. Protruding from one side was something that made the explorers' hearts race, a twisted metallic frame poking out just beneath the frost. As they edged closer using inflatable boats and snowmobiles, the truth became undeniable. This was no ordinary ice formation. This was the frozen carcass of a warplane, abandoned, forgotten, and locked in ice for over half a century. The aircraft embedded in that iceberg was part of a long-lost fleet that vanished in 1942 during Operation Bolero, a massive Allied effort to relocate American aircraft to Great Britain. 6 Lockheed 38 Lightning fighters in 2B-7 Flying Fortresses had made emergency landings on Greenland's ice sheet when severe weather and fuel limitations forced them down. While the crews were rescued shortly after landing, none seriously harmed. The planes were left behind, swallowed year by the relentless ice. Among these was the fighter that would later become legendary, Glacier Girl. Over the decades, the abandoned squadron had become the stuff of Arctic legend. Stories circulated of buried engines and ghost planes frozen beneath the ice cap, but few believed any could be recovered. That changed when Roy Schaffner, a Kentucky businessman, and Bob Carden, an aviation enthusiast, formed the Greenland Expedition Society. Their mission was simple on the surface: locate and retrieve one of the buried 38s, but it would prove harder than either of them imagined. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team identified a likely target under more than 260 feet of ice. Now, they only needed to find a way to chip away all that ice and free the plane. Roy Schaffner said, "If you can't go through it, and you can't go around it, you just work up another solution to the problem." The ingenuity required to extract a plane from beneath 268 feet of ice was staggering. After months of planning and engineering, they deployed a custom-designed thermal melting probe to drill through the glacier, tunneling vertically into the ice sheet. They reached the fuselage in 1992. What they found was astounding. The plane, though crumpled from the forced landing and decades of compression, was remarkably preserved. Dubbed Glacier Girl, the fighter had endured 50 years of crushing pressure and sub-zero isolation, yet its structure held firm. The surrounding ice had acted as a natural time capsule, protecting what was inside from decay, and it was what was inside the abandoned World War II plane that shocked everyone. First were the cockpit instruments, dials, gauges, and throttle levers still in place, many of them in a condition that made them restorable despite 5 decades in a frozen tomb. The cockpit looked eerily intact, as if waiting for a pilot to climb back in and take off once more. Next came the machine guns, 4 of them in total, 50 caliber Browning M2s mounted in the plane's nose with ammunition belts still partially loaded. The firepower intended for the skies over Nazi-occupied Europe had never fired a shot in anger. Instead, they had been entombed in glacial silence. Then came the radio equipment, original to the period and still mounted inside the fuselage. Vacuum tubes and wiring harnesses lay coated in a thin layer of frost, but otherwise untouched by time. Explorers carefully documented everything, cataloging the scene like archaeologists at a wartime Pompeii. But it was the personal items that truly humanized the wreck. Oxygen masks, flight gear, and leather straps still attached to the pilot seat. Personal items, food rations, log books, even a deck of playing cards discovered in compartments behind the cockpit. The items told a story of wartime youth, a squadron of young American aviators who faced a mission that didn't go as planned. The explorers felt a mix of emotions as they cataloged the findings. Here were the personal effects of young men barely past their teenage years who had given their lives for their country only to crash in one of the most inhospitable environments on the planet. Were they scared while they waited for help? Did they try to keep each other's spirits up? Unlike some embellished versions of the story, no human remains were found in Glacier Girl. All members of the Lost Squadron had been safely rescued shortly after their emergency landing in July 1942, but the eerie preservation of the aircraft created an emotional impact nonetheless. The frozen plane, isolated and preserved by 268 feet of ice, felt like a silent monument to the harrowing moments that defined the war. What was perhaps most shocking wasn't death or decay. It was how life and duty had been frozen in place, untouched by time. In the following months, Glacier Girl was painstakingly disassembled piece by piece and airlifted out of the recovery site. From there, she was shipped to Middlesboro, Kentucky, where she began a second life. Over the next 10 years, a team of engineers, mechanics, and historians meticulously restored the aircraft to flight condition. Damaged sections were rebuilt using original Lockheed specifications. Corroded components were replaced with fabricated parts that match the original designs. Roy Schaffner said, "People cannot believe we went down into the ice cap, disassembled the airplane, brought it up one piece at a time, and now have put it back together." Bob Carden said, "This is going to be the finest 38 in the world, and it may be the finest restoration of any war bird ever done." The airplane was about 80% or 85% original, but 100% authentic. In October 2002, Glacier Girl, abandoned for 50 years in one of the world's most inhospitable environments, flew again. Her engines roared across the skies of Kentucky in a triumphant resurrection. She was no longer just a relic. She was a living example of perseverance, engineering, and remembrance. Her recovery remains one of the most extraordinary aviation salvage operations in history, not just for the technical feat of melting and drilling through 268 feet of glacier, but for the story she told. This wasn't just about a World War II plane found frozen in an iceberg. It was about what was inside: memories, mechanisms, and mission artifacts that revealed what life was like in the cockpit of a wartime interceptor. In 2007, efforts were launched to complete her 1,942 mission, this time for tribute rather than tactics. The plan was to fly Glacier Girl from the U.S. to Duxford, England, following the same transatlantic route her squadron had originally intended. In June 2007, she departed from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. It was the journey she had been built for finally resumed after 6 decades, but fate intervened again. On June 28th, just 6 days into the flight, Glacier Girl suffered a coolant leak in her right engine and was grounded in Goose Bay, Labrador. Though the transatlantic crossing had to be postponed, the attempt alone stirred deep emotion in those who followed her story. Glacier Girl had once again taken flight, not for war, but for memory. News of Glacier Girl's recovery and restoration spread rapidly through aviation circles and historical communities worldwide. While the plane had been abandoned on the ice in 1942, her reappearance decades later reignited global fascination with the war and the human stories locked inside it. Richard Buchanan said, "She's like a rock star. The attention Glacier Girl attracts at events is incredible. Her display at the Lone Star Flight Museum in Houston brought thousands to view the plane that had been lost to time and found again by sheer persistence. Visitors were struck most by what had been recovered inside: the intact cockpit controls, the cold-preserved rations, the harnesses still looped around the seat. These weren't just items, they were symbols. Every object inside the plane told a story, silently echoing the day those young American pilots were forced down in one of the most remote places on Earth. They survived, but they left something of themselves behind, frozen in that steel frame. That's what made Glacier Girl more than just an aircraft. She was a time machine, an abandoned relic that returned to speak about courage, urgency, and survival. As of 2025, plans are still underway to recover more aircraft from the Lost Squadron. ECHCO and the remaining planes are buried deeper each year as the glacier drifts. Recovery operations are now racing against time and climate, with rising creases and unstable ice, making missions more dangerous. Yet, the allure remains. Each plane represents a frozen chapter of a war that reshaped the world, and each recovery offers a window into a moment that history nearly buried. Glacier Girl flies no combat missions now. Her battles are over. But, in her silence, in the contents discovered within her frame, she continues to tell one of the most remarkable stories of the Second World War. An abandoned World War II plane found frozen in an iceberg, carrying not a body, but a living memory. And one day, the entire Lost Squadron may just be reunited. What do you think Glacier Girl's story tells us about the importance of preserving history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.